My first job in television, excuse my voice. My first job in television was for a station called WOOD in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we had a stringer from Kalamazoo. His name was Lowell Plasterer. And Lowell was a former newspaper man. He was in his 80s. And a stringer is somebody, you know, who doesn't work directly on a salary, but he might be freelance and he's in an outlying area. Lowell used to call in once a day and he would have 3 stories. And they told me one of my jobs was to take in Lowell's 3 stories every day. I'd like to give you an example of one of Lowell's stories. Lowell called in and he said, well, a woman in Kalamazoo heard noises in her attic today, and she went up to her attic and she saw that there were squirrels in her attic. But instead of kicking them out, she decided to leave them in her attic. And I said, is that the story, Lowell? He said, yep. I said, what's the woman's name? He says, oh, I can't tell you that. She doesn't want anybody to know she has squirrels in her attic. Well, one day Lowell had given his customary 3 stories. And he said, oh, and I have one more story, but I don't think you'll be very interested. And I said, what's that, Lowell? And he said, well, 3 airplanes had to make forced landings on the expressway at 3 different times today. I said, Lowell, did you get any film of that? He said, no. I said, if that ever happens again, be sure and get film. He said, oh, that'll never happen again in a million years. I don't know why I told that story. But I guess it leads to a part of our subject, which is what makes a good news story. And I sit in New York, and surprisingly, the kind of programs you're working with, I've been doing these stories for 12 years, but even though talking to a lot of people last night and people saying to me, you know, we don't have the foggiest idea how to get started, how to write a publicity release. We're overworked. We don't have anybody in our program to do this. And I'm sitting in New York, and I'm getting my stories from the Oklahoma Gazette and all the papers that you could fairly easily be able to get into. So I thought maybe start out and talk about the break, the shield between me and you. Why do you have these wonderful stories, and why aren't they coming to me? And perhaps if I can ask somebody in the audience, what is your feeling about your publicity, public relations efforts at this time? Are most of you pleased, most of you displeased?
It's great, but they want us to do the writing for us. We already write 1,000 hours a day. That's the biggest thing, is trying to write our own stories.
So you don't feel you have a support system coming to you on a national level?
We found that, like with the next newspapers, when we put a story in, they always get it wrong. They'll give it word for word, pictures and everything else, and they'll turn around and they'll just butcher it, and you don't even know it's the same story.
How many of you are virtually not getting any coverage for what you do? And those that are, how many of you have a publicity person, either full-time, part-time, volunteer, working for you? So there's one person in the entire room that has someone who's devoting their time to publicity. Now, last night when I was chatting with some people here, we came up with the thought that, gee, if a local corporation is willing, let's say, to give an elderly person a job because you appeal to them, now wouldn't it look good for that corporation if they lent you their PR department or they lent you their publicity person for a month to do publicity for you? Or maybe if some kid at a local college could get credit for working for you for doing publicity. And it's really a matter of, I guess, just having the nerve to ask. If you were to call, there's a public relations association in New York where they offer their professionals to nonprofit groups who will give you advice for 2 or 3 hours on the phone. Public Relations Society of America. So there's a lot of help out there. Some of the things I want to talk about, well, first of all, I want to talk about what's a good story. I want to talk about whether you get good publicity or bad publicity, because, of course, if you kidnap the mayor's wife, you will get publicity. If I can borrow from my own personal life, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine went into a new business. He started a dating service. The phone rang, and a woman called him up, and she was here studying to be a doctor in the United States. She was from Switzerland, and she was heir to the Barton Candy family fortune. So he immediately married her. I said, Charles, this is a great opportunity for publicity. I mean, here a guy starts a dating service and he marries a woman who calls. I said, I think I can get you on a lot of shows. He said, that'd be great. So I wrote a publicity release and I sent it around to all the talk shows in New York, and they all wanted to have him on. And there was one show at that time. It was called the John Bartholomew Tucker Show. And they said, we'd like to put them on Valentine's Day and call them the love couple of the year. I said, that's great. Well, meanwhile, Charles is a very intense guy, and he talks double. And he calls me up and he says, Berman, I got to get out of this marriage. She's crazy. I said, Charles, you've got to stay married till the John Bartholomew Tucker show. So they go on the air and live, and they're the love couple of the year, and they have a fight. Live on the air. She calls him ugly, stupid. I'm, of course, never invited back as a publicist, and they got divorced 2 weeks later. But I think that illustrates some of the mistakes that can be made. So, of course, when you're sitting out, I think that obviously, not to get bad publicity, but to get good publicity, you have to set up some goals. Obviously, one of them is possibly to get new people to sign up for your program. Another, of course, would be donations. What are some of the other uses that you find or reasons that you need publicity? Opening this up to everyone. Yes?
In order to help us recruit people onto the program,
right.
To help us place people in unsubsidized programs.
Exactly, and if this is not happening, then nobody knows about you. Any other thoughts? Why you could use publicity? Exposure, right? Yes.
These articles also recruit employers. They read the article and then they call us and offer.
And so, how many of you in the room are saying publicity now is working well for you? This is happening. Very few, right? Well, we'll talk a little bit about publicity release, but and there are some people who run entire workshops on how to write a publicity release. But frankly, what is more important to the editors today is the power of a really great story. And since there have been cutbacks in television and cutbacks in newspapers, they don't have researchers to ferret out these stories. You'll find that they'll be remarkably friendly to you because they're filling an enormous amount of time. And we not only now have our local stations, but we have our cable stations and we have our syndicated shows. And I throw with me, someone made a list just in Boston. They went to look and say, what is on the air right now in Boston? Newsroom Hotline, Eyewitness News Almanac, First 4 News, Eyewitness News, the I-Team Hotline, Impact Series, Women, Evening Magazine, Money Sense, Coming Together, Eyewitness News Conference for Kids Only, Community Auditions, A Show of Faith, Primetime, Speak Out, Soapbox, and I didn't even mention public service announcements. So all of this is going on. All of these things need to be filled up with stories. And if you call with a good story, and a lot of people are intimidated by writing. They don't get to the first page. They say, gee, I've got to sit down and write this, and I've never done this before. They don't care. They don't care if the spelling is wrong. They don't care if you call them up instead. If you hit them with a great story, that's what they live and breathe on. More often than not, sometimes you're going to have to create these stories. And I find that to be a lot of fun because that's the brainstorming area. What can you do with your 25th anniversary? Can you have, let's say, a party for everyone in town who's 25 years old? Can you somehow tie into that number 25? Can you give away 25 somethings? Can you plan a time capsule? And I find if you sit around a room and you start thinking, and the wilder, you start thinking very wild, and then rein yourself in. Say, well, that's too crazy. But, you know, they're looking for colorful stories because they're in the business of getting a lot of viewers, a lot of listeners. The more colorful, as long as it's not a detriment, as long as it doesn't make your program seem silly or funny, the more colorful, the more attention that you're going to get. Do we have any particular individual problems that maybe, since this is a workshop, we can just bring one up and throw it around? Yes? Okay, but how many workers are in your program? 50. And have you sat down, let's say, and done an oral history with these people? And, you know, one of them may have boxed with Joe Louis. Or, I mean, have you sat down and talked to them about what is in their background that might be really fascinating, that might be a peg for a story? Have you ever done that? And there was nothing there that was very interesting. All right, now, is the Statesman the only ball game in town? But there are TV stations in Boise, right? And there are radio talk shows in Boise. And then there are wire services that feed from Boise to the whole state. And then those are picked up to the whole country. Now, one thing you can do is make your local media aware that you are a spokesman in your town for the elderly, and that whenever there's a national story relating to, let's say, the workplace or the elderly, you're somebody that they can call to make a comment. Another thing to do is look at your newspapers, watch your TV, who are doing stories that are sympathetic to your cause, and start making a note. Which reporters on your local TV station, in the Boise paper, consistently do stories sympathetic to your cause? Call them up. See if you can visit them. See if you can get them out to see the program. You have to be aggressive, and that is the first rule. And that comes to another thought that I have, and that is you have a big advantage in publicity being an amateur. And the reason is that if you're a professional, just like when I called up with Shapiro and his wife, now, had they turned me down, I might have called one more time, but I wouldn't call again because I was thinking at that time, I may have to get back to them with somebody else. I don't want to ruffle their feathers. You are talking about something very vital in America, and you can call them 20 or 30 times until maybe they'll put you on because they're sick of you. You know. So it really, in publicity, it pays to be. There is an amateur edge. Yes, sir.
Another problem that some of us have, we're in small markets, especially TV, where personnel in the news force changes about every 6 months. And by the time somebody knows who you are, you've got the next person coming out, you've got to tell the whole thing from day one, and they pick up just a small part of it. That turnover in small markets is...
well, that's a societal problem, and that's true with the networks too now, and that's true with the newspapers, and everyone is cutting back, you know, and they're trying purposely to get rid of experienced people because they want young people that don't have to pay as much or don't have as much vacation.
Real quick out of our area.
Exactly. There's not much you can do about that except try to keep track. You know, I mean, there really is not much you can do about that. Some other thoughts of other individual problems that you're having. There are. Oh, yes.
In relation to her question, I find a lot of our people do not get the newspapers, and so I think radio's fun, and I pick the radio stations that play the slower music, and that's that market.
Well, that brings you to another area, and why it's worth putting a lot of efforts into publicity, because, of course, it's free, number one, but two, it has a lot more credibility. If you find yourself in the middle of a news program, people are going to believe what your message a lot more than if it's self-serving, than if it's an advertisement. Another question that comes up is how much does it cost? And I can't imagine, in no instance when I've ever done any has it cost very much, because it's been stationery, stamps, and phone calls. Obviously, if you're planning an event, then it gets more expensive. If you have to rent a hall, if you're having, let's say, as an idea, for example, a celebrity autograph auction, which I've started a charity myself, and it has to do with animal visitation to hospitals. And next fall we're going to have a celebrity autograph auction, and I'm writing away to celebrities and asking them to send me their autographs, and then use those autographs. Hopefully there are a lot of famous people will respond and use those autographs to get the publicity, to get people to attend the auction, to raise the money for it. So this is something anybody in the room could do, and you could also get some local celebrities involved. I don't know how many of you have ever done that. Well, and because it is a kind of cause that I think they would like to be associated with. So I'm, using NBC auspices, I'm hopeful, because I used to write for Maria Shriver, I'm going to ask her if she would go to a movie with herself and Arnold. Because then I want to say, how much would you bid to go to a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that type of thing. But that can be done on a local level. Maybe a tour of the newsroom with your local newswoman or newsman, It's just sit around 6 or 8 at a time and think of the wildest things you can, but then rein yourself in. But they're looking, they want color. They want colorful things that are out of the ordinary. Otherwise, you're just going to get that once a year mention, unless you start cooking up some things, And people are reticent, they're shy, but there's no reason to be. I mean, I just think it's more fun than anything else, There's another factor involved, and that is, I guess you would call the spiraling effect of publicity, and that is, you get this write-up in the Oklahoma Gazette, and then you go around and you reprint that, and you send that out to all these TV editors and newspaper editors who are basically lazy, and they're overworked, and they're looking for stories that are already done for them. They don't have the research capabilities to go out and do all the legwork these days. this thing comes and it's already in print, so that gives it this cachet that it must be valid, it's in print, and all the work is done for them. So you take your first story, and you're sending that around, and when you get your second one, then you add that, and you send it all around again. I'm going to borrow from another life story, and that has to do with when I was had a girlfriend in New York who was working for Columbia University Library. And she told me that they were taking old newspapers and putting them on microfilm and then discarding them. And she brought me a copy of Horace Greeley's New York Tribune from 1865. Now, these old papers they're on rag paper, and there's no acid in these papers. They're in perfect condition. I was amazed that anybody could get anything like this for free, and I called the library, and there was a man in charge of a section called Gifts and Exchanges. And he oversaw the newspaper collection. And I said, listen, I have one of these papers. Do you think I could get another one? And he said, I'm really too busy to bother with individuals. I have too many papers. And I said, well, what if I came by with a truck? No, then you can have them all. So a friend and I drove up to Columbia University with a truck, and we left with 100 years of the London Times, from 1800 through 1900, plus all these great old New York papers. And I lived at that time in a fourth-floor studio, one-room apartment. A friend and I carried they took up my entire apartment. My sister called them a high-rise for roaches. They were like the whole... just at that time, I met a guy, and he was starting a magazine for entrepreneurs. And I told him this story, and he said, that's a great story for my first issue. So I wrote a story, and it was called How I Was Given $100,000 Worth of Rare Historical Newspapers, and You Can Get Some Too. Now, I had no idea what they were worth, but I took a little literary license. The story came out, and it ended up on the desk of Columbia University. And there was a furor at the university. And Fred Friendly said, well, if we had known that, we would have wanted the papers, you know. So the university, now here's where we get to the spiraling effect of publicity. The university sent a reporter and a photographer to my apartment. They took a picture of me with a scotch in my hand, sitting on my newspaper, looking very gleeful, you know. And they picked up on the $100,000 figure, okay? The New York Times saw this. Without even interviewing me, did a big story on Richard Berman and his $100,000 worth of newspapers. Eyewitness News saw that and sent a crew to my apartment. Then they came back and said, we need to get more clutter shots, they called it. Meanwhile, so I would be riding on the bus, and I would hear people talking and say, did you hear about the guy who got $3 million worth of rare historical newspaper? And this kept building, and then the editor of the magazine, the publisher of the magazine, rather, went on the Mike Douglas show and told the story. And it just, you know, it would spiral from one place to the next. Meanwhile, I had more newspapers than you could read in 10 lifetimes. And I had a moderate interest in selling some of the damn things. So I sat there for 4 years, living in these newspapers, and one day the phone rang, and it was a man from Wichita, Kansas. And he said, is this the Richard Berman who had all those old newspapers? And I said, yes. And he said, would you be interested in selling any of them? And I paused as if I was thinking about it. I said, well, I might. And he flew in the next day, and he bought 90% of the papers, not for anywhere near $100,000, not for anywhere near $10,000, but he bought 90% of the papers. I kept and still have the ones that I thought were the best. He flew back to Kansas, and he put them in a mine in Kansas. Then he convinced the Son of the Beach Aircraft Corporation to go into business selling my newspapers nationwide, taking full-page ads in. One day I got a call, and he said, so what happened was they lost $2.3 million trying to sell my newspaper. One day I got a call from this guy. I said, Rich, what do you think I ought to do with all these old newspapers? I said, I don't know if I know. I wouldn't have sold them to you. But that story just kept growing and growing, and that is basically this theory of the building blocks of taking each piece, adding the next piece, and saying, okay, now we've been on this, and now we've done that, and your story grows and grows and becomes more impressive. At this juncture, are there any questions, any thoughts, something we're not covering yet? A little liveliness.
Can you give examples of what is news?
Well, the best example I can give is that when you pick up the paper and you're very selective and you're not looking at some things because you think they're not interesting, and you are looking at other things because you think that they are interesting, and you're the judge, you know, you're the editor at that point, and every editor is subjective. There is no one person who can say, this is newsworthy and this isn't. And that's why some shows are dull and some shows are interesting. And some magazines you find dull and some you find interesting. But after a while, if you're practicing with this, you're seeing what people are responding to. And whether they stay on the phone and whether they want to do something about this or whether they... You know, I've made up a story at NBC. The homeless are moving into ghost towns. Now, it's not happened. If I could find some, it would be a great story. You know, it's just my instincts tell me that's a great story. I don't know how I know it, but I know that that's something people would talk about the next morning. So I guess the answer is just simple practice and dealing with the media and getting turned down or getting accepted, and over a period of time seeing what is it they're accepting and what is it that they're turning down.
And if they're not reading the newspaper, a big newspaper, not just the local paper, I think it's a mistake. Because that's how you get to know what the news is. What you just said is read news stories.
Well, you've got, yeah.
Then people don't do that. They don't do that.
Well, that is a problem if you're going to do publicity. And also to find out, and there are more things happening in town than you can imagine. There are more shows going on that unless you're looking in your newspaper listings and your radio shows, and you'll probably find that Associated Press, if it doesn't have a bureau in your town, it certainly has one in your state, and that they are feeding stories to the whole state, and if that story is a success, that story is being fed to the whole country. Now, and related to this animal-assisted therapy, I went to a convention in Houston early this year, and they were giving an award to a dog, and the dog was a dog that had enabled a handicapped child to have a full life because he did so many things that you're familiar with that, the Delta Society, and okay. And they said to me, "How can we get some publicity for this?" Well, every television network has a syndicated service of stories that they send to their local stations, about 20 or 30 stories every day. And the local stations accept them or reject them. They use them on the night they're on their local news show, or they don't use them. But it gives them a bank of stories so that they can fill out their program. Most of these stories are not generated by the network. They're done by the local station and then sent by satellite to the network, compiled by the network, sent back out to the local station. So what happened here was, well, I said, call this fellow in New York who does this syndication. If he likes this story, he'll call the local affiliate in Houston and ask them to do the story and send it to him. So that's what they did. They called the fellow whose name I gave him in New York. He liked the story. He called Houston and said, "Are you planning to cover this for your local show?" And they said, "Well, we weren't planning to." He said, "Well, if you do, send it to me and I'll use it in our feed." So Houston covered the story, sent it by satellite to NBC in New York. NBC then turned around and sent it by satellite to every affiliate station in the country. And suddenly this little story was on hundreds of stations all over the United States. This is very common, and this is a technique. And it's something that, you can... I can't tell you how to know these things other than, write them down, because they're not all in any one place, and technology is changing so quickly now that a lot of things I would tell you about who to call or what a particular... I'm sorry. Yes. What a particular cable company is doing, that's going to change very soon. In fact, the cable companies are starting to originate their own news shows. And that's already happening in Los Angeles and in Long Island and in New England. And that may be a whole new outlet. In 3 years, you're going to have direct broadcast cable, and you're going to have 250 channels available on cable and even more options, and probably channels just devoted to what you're doing, related to what you're doing. So I'd like to try to stay away from those kind of specifics because, as someone pointed out, the people keep leaving, new people keep coming in, they keep changing. You have to be on top of it or get somebody who's willing to be. It won't happen for you unless you get a volunteer, maybe a retired publicist in your town who'd be willing to do this. I'm sorry, someone, yes.
I have a question that may be a problem from more programs than just mine. The problem of keeping the public aware, keeping the employers aware on an ongoing basis. Part of it is recruiting, part of it is education of the public, and part of it is maybe generating money for our agency and so forth. But someone said earlier that who wants to hear about, older workers? It's not really interesting. Occasionally, you can find, a juicy news item. That's one thing. But how do we manage this ongoing news? We always need news. We always need money. We always need the public to keep our news in mind. And what happens is that we get turned down by local agencies because in the area where I live, everybody's broke. Everybody's hurting. And all the nonprofits are dropping like flies. So the media people, they'll maybe take something from us, but there are 100 others So what do you do about it?
Well, you were going to say something, respect?
You let me respond to people. I'd like to say something. I don't know where you are, but we have public television. I think we all have public CBS. And we've been very successful in Tucson in getting the attention of a person who's sympathetic to the cause. And any little stories that we bring up, I've done what the gentleman said, interviewed a quite elderly person that had really interesting things to say, had them in the newspaper. Another thing we did, it was a quirk, but it was funny. I wrote an article inviting people to my house for a fundraiser, but they ran Irma Bombeck's picture instead of mine.
Well, that's a good technique.
And we got a good response. And then we came to my Irma would be there. And I said, well, no, she's not coming. But I did write to her and tell her what happened, and I thanked her for helping. She said it was very nice to be thanked for something she didn't do. But it's really big on purpose. I didn't. It just so happened it happened. You do need little things. But I find public television very good. I find writing postcards to any of the calendars. And if you're trying to reach new recruits, the newspaper is not where to do it. Because the other lady said they don't buy the newspaper because they can't afford it. You have to go to radio or TV, and all radio and TV have public service announcements. All of them have a certain amount of public service announcements. I have found this very interesting right now. All they can start giving us, and I just wanted to share some of what we've been in. You go to different uses. You go to different media for different audiences. Your buses might allow you to put things inside the bus. Your city council might allow you to put things inside the bus because every time you're helping people, you're helping your town. If you can get your councilman from your ward, and you can tell him, look, we can get some people on for food stamp welfare or et cetera. If you cooperate with us, you might find someone that will cooperate with you. I have a program I use which is under the Hispanic program, and I can say that we've already placed all our unsubsidized for the rest of the year. And I do it because I go to individual owners that own a business. I know you don't have time, but it's like you have to make time because it's more important now to make your whole program more successful, and then you'll have more time. It's kind of like you have to first clean your face before you have to put the makeup on, so if you don't, it doesn't come out right. But the priorities are very important, and I think that you just have to kind of make yourself a priority list, but there is a lot of free publicity, and I think we're step number 7, recruiting strategies and techniques, because we're, some of us really want to go to start getting in the newspapers too, rather than the need again. We really do down to how well written stories. We've had wonderful stories where people dress up to go deliver meals on Valentine's and Halloween, and they won't put it in. But if somebody, fell over and cut themselves or did something horrible, it would be right there. So that's the part I can think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Usually on Monday, they have a lot of newspapers have that business section, a big business supply goes out. That is one good program to do if you want to get to the business people. Put it on in there, get posted on in that way. So a lot of the business managers and corporation owners look at that.
Well, I think, I don't know your name, the woman who asked the original question, but a lot of it, I think, has to do with just the nerve to ask. Now, when I sat down and I started working on my autograph auction, and I wrote to Jimmy Stewart, and I said, "Dear Jimmy, would you please draw a picture of Harvey the Rabbit and sign it for me?" And he did. I don't know why he did. So I got very bold. Now, I've written a letter to Stephen King, and I've asked him to draw the ghost. He hasn't responded to me yet. In fact, I was sitting in my office, and my boss came in New York, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing to Stephen King and asking him to draw a picture of a ghost." But he shook his head and he laughed. But I'm sorry. Yes. Well, 9 times out of 10, the kind of stories that you would be trying to sell, so to speak, are of a feature nature. They're not breaking news. What you'd be thinking about breaking news stories. If you're planning an event and you want to plan it on a day when you get the most coverage, I've never thought about that. I mean, it's a good question, and I assume that there's, you're probably better off on the weekends when they don't have a lot of obligatory things about the Middle East or coming from Washington or things that they have to cover for a feature story. You're probably better off on the weekends. Someone else? Yes, I'm sorry.
Do the newspapers have interns? They have to young interns who have to work at the
No.
stations or TV or whatever.
Yes.
That maybe you could also borrow? Or
I think so, and I think you could go to a local university, particularly where they're studying journalism, and say, listen, can you work out a way that somebody can work on credit and do our publicity and do our public relations for us? What I found chatting with some people last night was there was a lot of resistance to just sitting down and writing. People are very shy about writing. I don't want to go into, a publicity release, many of you will know, is, the standard who, what, where, and when, and every library has 3 or 4 books on publicity that will tell you how to write a publicity release. But the key is a great story. They're looking for great stories. They're not worried about how well your release or your letter is written. They're not worried about the spelling. They just need great, great stories. And that comes out of brainstorming. I'm sorry, yes. Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. A city of 40,000. Well, when you say you're contagious, what does that mean? What are you doing that other people aren't doing? Now, then, when you get a good story and good housekeeping, do you then turn that around and send that out to a whole?
And we don't send a dime. In 19 years, I've never sent a dime on an ad of any kind. That's how life is working. We created a warm period. But the thing about my particular style, my particular program, that we really care, and I think that's true, that we're genuinely interested in the betterment of our people. And the love and the warmth that we create and generate ongoing, it stays warm and hot all the time. But I would encourage anybody, if they're not active among the business community, that's where you got to come from. Everything comes to spiral and take our people and take a spiral. Because we are a spiral that's ongoing all the time. And it works well for me.
And if anyone in this room wanted to give you a call and talk about what they're doing?
Do you ever work with Sam Walton?
This I don't sound walking. This I get sometimes when his hands are candy so I went. I know Mr. Walker and his staff. And I make it a point. I read the newspaper. And when a new business comes in, I'm the one with the changes. They do too, but I do too. I welcome them too. If I can help you in any way, think you come out and say, oh, you're going to call me. Yes, I understand Walker and his staff as well.
And now you are well enough known to do any of the newspapers when they have an issue about the elderly or the workplace, they come to you.
They identify with me now as being the leader of the elderly in my particular area. And I love, the field and the respect that gives me. But it's really other people that are higher achievers than me. But it's worked well for me because of the high visibility that I have had before we did. And it's worked really well.
And I'm sure it's been fun, right?
It's been fun. Oh, I love it. I told people all the time, look, I really myself in the technology, and I've never not loved what I do. That's not to say I had tremendous headaches, I have, but I still love what I do.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Oh, and what is your name and where are you from? All right, we'll all be over for dinner then. We have an hour and a half, and I thought maybe we could take a 10-minute break, okay? And see you back. Thank you.
I'm Helen Erickson, and I was with Knight Ritter for 15 years.
Oh, great.
And now I'm doing communications for Green Fund. So I was asking the questions and listening because part of my job is to do this for our state director.
Well, how am I doing?
Wonderful.
Oh, good.
You mentioned at the beginning about public relations. We set up our own little department in my operation. And for an example, how we work is we have an ongoing situation where we move from newspaper articles to television things, and then to show you how things work out. I get on as many talk shows as we can get on TV. And what happened out of one of the talk shows...
I'm sorry, yes.
This is one of the talk shows that we were on with one of the local stations. I said to him, gee, I'd love to make a public service spot. Would you people be able to accommodate? He said, sure. What do you want to do? So I sent me to a typewriter. I typed out a 10 or 15-second slot. They taped me right after the show, and they sent it out to all of the other networks. And they were playing it all over the air. So actually, if you lay out a plan of action on these things, you get an awful lot of results.
Well, I'm going to call on you at a certain point in the second...
I'm Janet Gazelle with the National Urban League.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. I am working on... Good morning. I'm responsible for a lot of employment activities at the League, and I'm trying to work on upgrading a handbook that I initially developed on PR for older workers to be more encompassing to urban leagues around the country. Are you available to talk to about that in New York?
Yeah. I'll give you a card.
Great.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question about, I'm in a smaller town, Terre Haute, Indiana, an ex-New Yorker in Terre Haute, Indiana, if you can imagine.
Thank
and
you.
What they do is
And the name's Zobel.
Okay, I'll look forward to it.
I write well, and I was an English lit major at University of Illinois, and I write well. Well, these young reporters feel that part of their job is to rewrite your stuff, and it comes out a little distorted. They'll leave out sections, crucial sections.
Yeah.
And what
May
do you
I
do?
tell you there's absolutely nothing
I can do.
because they're trying to show their mettle and they're inexperienced, and it will be you don't want to alienate them because you want them to come back, and I think it will plague you your whole life.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything you can do about it.
And once they had, of course, they have turnover all the time. The editor, I wrote an article and he printed it under my name, and I had fictitious and I made up interesting characters, and he printed that entire thing by me on the editorial page. And that time it was good. I got a big response.
Yeah, I don't think you can certainly, if you know that they're going to cover something, call them a day or two before and say, I just want to make sure you have all the facts, if there's anything. And when they did the program for this, for my speaking, they wrote on this, and Richard Berman is the primary writer for so-and-so, so-and-so, and Jessica Savage. Poor Jessica's been dead for
a long time, I remember.
So, same thing happened to me right here. But I don't think you'll never get around it.
I find they'll print anything, so you can give them statistics that are all wrong.
Well, that's what happened with my $100,000 worth of newspaper.
But I find I can hit the press when I'm recruiting. I'll get radio spots, TV coverage. You can
just have to do is be assertive, I think, and just tell them I have a good story.
Hi, Kurt Soderberg from the state of Iowa. I was wondering, I can already tell you have great insight into this, and I just don't want to be, raising rhetorical questions.
I wish you would, because I need to fill another.
Well, you're doing great, but I was wondering, having worked, one of the dilemmas I face, I used to work for a farm organization, and I could get a lot of media coverage. I now work for government, and see, most of these folks really work for government.
Right.
I mean, whether they're private, nonprofits or whatever, it seems to me, number one, it seems like, particularly with government, if you do something wrong, you get lots of coverage.
Yeah.
If you do something right, I don't know, I have turned over backwards in trying to get coverage for my program, and yet, I don't know if I just don't know how to frame the package or whatever to get the coverage.
Well, I think it's what we're saying. I mean, we sit down with 6 or 8 people and say, what do we got here that we can make... Oh, I'm going to stop this for a second. No, it's all right.